So I thought, who should I have this conversation with? Who should be my plus one this go round? And I thought, Evan Ross Katz. Evan, thank you for being my date today.
Oh my God, Katie, I will always be your plus one when called upon.
Well, we should probably, I think some of my listeners might not be familiar with your work, Evan. How would you describe yourself and what you do?
Um, I would say I am a pop culture chronicler. That would be the term. It was said to me once, and I really liked it, so I would use that. I would also borrow something that Mike White said about me, which is he said that I am the most valuable hype man in TV history, which is literally going to permanently go in my bio. And yeah,
Have you
that to
gotten
me is
that
sort of
tattooed? Do you
I
have that
haven't gotten it
tattooed?
yet. It's on the list, It's on the list. Maybe a lower back tattoo. But honestly, like that to me, whenever I have to describe myself, I just defer to Mike on that?
Please don't get a tramp stamp, Evan.
Yeah, I think it's a little 90s.
And of course, Mike White is the writer, creator, director of White Lotus. And we should just talk very briefly before we bring Molly in about how you and I got to know each other. I mean, I kind of made you what you are today, Evan.
You did, you did. I credit you with all of my quote unquote success is all through the pipeline of Katie Couric.
Well, to explain, please.
So you had me on one of your we did a live show together. I think this was like what, 2 years ago now? Time really
Right
does
at City
fly.
Winery.
Yes, and you surprised me with a video from Mike White, which is when he deemed me the super fan that I am. And then from there, I formed a friendship with Mike, and now I'm involved in some facet of the White Lotus that I can't quite yet announce, but it has led to, exciting professional opportunities for me via Mike White.
That is awesome.
Wow.
That is awesome. Hi, Molly. So we might as well say hi to Molly Jong-Fast, who is our guest today. Molly is an MSNBC political analyst, host of the Fast Politics podcast. She's a Vanity Fair special correspondent. She wears many hats, but today she's wearing the hat as our guest of Next Question. Molly Jong-Fast and Evan Ross Katz. I don't know. It just seems to fit together, doesn't it, Molly?
Three names for the win, right?
Well, let's talk about internet culture because that's something that Evan is uniquely familiar with, and I think is actually in some ways responsible for certain aspects of it. And you, Molly, started a series on Instagram called Internet Stuff. When did you decide to start sharing tweets
Oh,
and memes you stumbled upon?
oh, that's a really interesting question that no one has ever asked me about. So much of my life is this obsession. And it's a question I ask people all the time. And I'm curious to hear both of your answers of it too, I hope. We're this country, 300 plus million people, really like 330 million people. That is a humongous country. And only like 10 million people read the newspaper, right? uh, you know, 2 million, 3 million watch cable news, 4, 5, 6, maybe as many as 7 watch, regular news. So where is everyone getting all of their news from? And I have become obsessed with this idea. Like, where are people getting their news from? Like, where? And so I decided that I just needed, and as Twitter X has become less and less useful because again, there's no algorithm. And I'm curious what you both think of this because there's no algorithmic transparency on any of these sites. So we don't know why some things do well and other things don't do well, right? And we don't know
Right.
why, the algorithm likes a certain picture and doesn't like another picture when it comes to Instagram, or why a tweet gets a gazillion retweets and not another tweet. So my question was always like, why are you seeing what you're seeing? And as X got less and less good, I became more and more obsessed with the idea of just at least getting something out there, right? And that's why I started posting that kind of stuff on Instagram, not because I particularly think I mean, in my own personal life, I don't know that text on Instagram does anything good for me, but I became so, one of the things that I think has really not served me this election cycle is that I truly believe everything I'm saying. So I truly believe that that Donald Trump is an existential threat to American democracy, and that if this election if Trump gets reelected, that we are all going to be living in a world that is hard to really fathom. And so I have I actually really, and again, this is something you're sort of not supposed to be as a journalist, but I am on the opinion side. I genuinely am just anxious about getting content out there so that people can see. And, one of the great people who is often on Morning Joe and sometimes with me is, the guy who does the charts, this amazing Steve Ratner.
Oh, Steve Ratner.
And Steve Ratner just gets the information out there. And part of me wonders, like, how much can we just try to get the information in front of people? And so that's why I started doing it, just be out of sheer anxiety that people are not, that perhaps another person will see a bit of news that will then galvanize them to vote.
And Evan, how did you, Evan, become a pop culture chronicler on social media? And why were you drawn to that? Just as Molly is trying to disseminate information because she's in a constant state of anxiety.
Yes,
but your kind of obsession with internet culture predates this election. Tell us how you got sucked into it.
Yeah, I mean, so similar to Molly, like Twitter obviously is a very different platform now. It doesn't even have that name anymore. But I still like to use Twitter to extract information. I still find it to be a valuable place to learn about pop culture. I would also agree with Molly where I don't really trust the likes on Twitter anymore. So even though Twitter will tell me this post has gone viral, I'm not always so sure about that. And I think it actually leads to a lot of the dissemination of, in fact, misinformation. But to answer your question, I think for me in the beginning, it was very organic. There were things that I was drawn to that I didn't see people talking about enough. And I thought, at that time I had a very small platform, but for me, it was just about like wanting to recommend things to my friends, wanting to get eyeballs on things that I found interesting. I also found that in this media landscape where there is so much out there, I mean, we're talking about politics today, but the internet encompasses sports, there's fashion, there's entertainment, there's so many conversations happening on the internet that I found the idea of distilling it to be something that was really valuable for people. And so I said earlier that I like to think I'm a pop culture chronicler, but I'm also trying my best to distill the information that I think audiences should be hearing about, because even in the entertainment landscape, there's just so much content out there. So it's important for some people to have that, sort of shrunken as much as possible and shown to them in fits and starts.
You weren't always focused on politics. In fact, you're kind of late to the political arena, Evan. But I would venture to say, Molly and Evan, that this is the first truly social media election. Yes, we had Donald Trump tweeting wildly in 2016, and we've had obviously social media gaining significant ground. More people get their news from digital devices than linear television now. I mean, Kamala Harris has 250 people working on her digital team, and they're doing a really phenomenal job. We talk about, the brat moment this summer. We talk about, the coconut tree stuff that actually was used to her advantage. Molly, when you look at the whole political landscape, are you surprised at how much social media has really taken over this campaign cycle?
No, and you're right about the team. They have done amazing stuff. I actually was there the other day doing little interviews with them in Wilmington, which is not close to anything, in case you're wondering.
Why are they in? I mean, I know that's where Joe Biden is. Is that just where they set up shop? Couldn't they have moved to New York or Washington?
I think many of them have that same question, but they all stayed in Wilmington, Delaware. So if you want to
have been fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, I was like, you guys, what is it like being, some of them have been there for as much as a year and change, like a year and 2 months. They said there's a lot of hiking trails. It was pretty bleak. They do a lot of drinking. I mean, they do a lot of
hopefully not
a lot
drinking
of running
while posting, though.
Right. No, hopefully not. They eat a lot of junk food. So yes, this is the first social media election. I would say a thing that I think about a lot is that tech companies after bankrupting local news, right? After pretty much taking apart our media ecosystem, have given up on content moderation and, any kind of fact checking. So now we sort of we gave over the keys, and they have decided they're going to key our car. So in my mind, I'm a little salty about that. I'm going to be honest, and a little bit mad at them. And I don't quite understand. There's so much disinformation. I mean, Elon Musk has already said a million different ways, including jumping up and down in Pennsylvania, that he is actively working for Donald Trump.
So that he's willing to spend $140 million to make sure that he's elected. I just read that.
Yeah. I mean, that for Elon is a rounding error, but certainly he wants, and I mean, I have to wonder how much of Elon's Trump ambitions for Trump have to do with AI and the future of AI and not having any regulation there. I mean, one of the ways in which the American government on the left and the right has just completely fucked up. Can I curse?
Yes.
Yeah, fucked up beyond recognition is they decided not to ever do any regulation when it comes to technology or social media. So you have CBS is not allowed to be owned by, there are all sorts of rules for CBS, right? All sorts of rules for NBC, New York Times, and then Twitter, whatever. Instagram, sure. Largest social media platform owned by the Chinese government. What are we doing, man? I'm sorry. That's all I have to say.
What do you think, Evan, about sort of the takeover by social media of the political realm, and just talk about how you've seen this campaign unfold on your phone?
Yes. So I would push back at the idea of this being like the first social media election. I do think this took place in 2016 as well. I think the big difference would be the level of engagement from the campaigns themselves, because I do think people were very active on social media in 2016, and the candidates were as well, but there was a different way in which they were speaking to the platform at that time.
Yeah, I guess
a big difference.
They've taken full advantage of social media, and
so
almost it feels like to me, as someone who's covered these elections for a while, it feels like a social media first strategy in some ways. And of course, maybe that's because I don't watch that much television and I'm on my phone, and this is where I'm getting the messaging. But go on.
Yeah, and I often feel like you can watch television by going on social media because people are clipping out the moments that you need to see. So in essence, we are watching television, even though we aren't going to the platform itself. But what I see as the big difference with something like Kamala HQ, for instance, is that they're able to actually post clips of the opposing party, like the opposing ticket, and make them look dumb. And that is something that I think is unique. If you go to Kamala Harris's Instagram page, you're not going to see clips of Trump looking stupid in an interview, but on Kamala HQ, you will. There are some key moments. For instance, JD Vance at the donut shop looking like an idiot. That is not going to be posted on Kamala's account, but the HQ account can seize on that moment, a moment that has so much virality potential, and actually use the Kamala HQ account to disseminate a video like that wouldn't have a home elsewhere. So there's an ownability to being able to dunk on someone like Trump that Kamala HQ has seized on. And interestingly, on the inverse side, Trump does not have any form of Trump HQ. So what that ended up being was the attempt of that was sort of the original. Is it that Republican? There's some Republican account on Twitter that was the one that was first posting the videos of Kamala with the coconut. I'm not sure which. Maybe there was some account that was the one that first put out the Kamala coconut video that ended up going viral. That was their attempt to sort of create the Kamala HQ narrative on their side, but it ended up backfiring, and people just ended up loving it. And then Kamala HQ came, grabbed that clip, and said, "No, this is actually wonderful," and people bought that. So I feel like the Republican Party has not been able to find the counterpoint to Kamala HQ.
Having said that, I've seen a lot of posts and a lot of videos making fun or mocking Kamala Harris from the GOP side. I'm not sure if they are as coordinated as Kamala HQ or whatever. But I do see a lot of memes and jokes made about Kamala Harris. Maybe it's just less centralized.
Yes, I think they're certainly out there. I think that, internet parlance is its own language. And I think within that language, Trump is just an easier target because he says more, he's just more quotable, for better or for worse, depending on your perspective. But I also think in the time that Kamala has become the nominee, her team, I think at the advice of her team, she's become a little bit more buttoned up in sort of, being more careful about offering up quotes like akin to just fell out of the coconut tree. So she has not given us as much opportunity to, make her go viral. I think even if you look at her DNC speech, that was very carefully crafted, in my opinion, so that it would, eliminate the possibility of remarks of hers being turned into TikTok videos.
Let's talk about those TikTok videos, Molly. Obviously, a lot of people, particularly younger people, are getting their news and information from TikTok. And I know that again, Kamala Harris's social media team is really exploiting that platform. Do you think, Molly, that's going to translate into a lot of younger people going to the polls? What do you think that will do for the race itself come election day?
So that's the $10 billion question that we're all sitting around wondering about because polls are so, right? Landline polling is not what it used to be. I mean, does anyone here even have a landline? Do you have a landline?
I don't.
I don't either. So there we
Nope.
go. So landline polling is not as useful an indicator as it once was. From what I understand, and again, I'm not a big TikTok user, but from what I understand, Harris has a lot of virality on TikTok with young people. The campaigns I've talked to, and I've talked to a lot of campaigns, said that as she swapped over to her in July, that the enthusiasm was enormous. She raised $1 billion, right? And that's a lot of money. And it's the most ever in 3 months.
Right.
So I think that and then the voter registration is first time voter registration was spurred on by that. You had people like you had, singers
Taylor
and
Swift.
yeah, that was who I was thinking of actually. People like Taylor Swift. And she drove gonzo numbers for voter registration. Um, so again, who knows? But those all seem like very good indicators to me. The polls, again, are tight. The trajectory, though, has been largely good. She has opened the map in states that were not in play under Joe Biden, like North Carolina and Georgia. And there's a real feeling, especially in North Carolina, so one of the things that has happened in North Carolina and Florida, lesser extent in Georgia, is that because of inflation, because of climate change, the insurance has become crazy high in Florida and North Carolina. Flood insurance is some places they don't do it. Government has to do it. It's $1 gazillion. And so there is a sense that is from climate change and that perhaps voters will, in fact, that is a part of inflation that really could be
Motivating.
very good for Harris. Yeah, motivating for Harris.
And Evan, what do you think? Do you think that these social media clips and various things that are being posted will have an impact? Maybe Trump doesn't have Kamala HQ, but again, I've seen a ton of pro-Trump things and things making fun of Kamala. As I said, less organized perhaps, but certainly out there in a big way. What impact do you think all of this is having on young voters?
Well, it's interesting you say that because recently Kamala was on the cover of Vogue, and I went to the
Right.
comment section of Vogue's Instagram account, and it is just a ton of pro-Trump, pro-Vance rhetoric on there, which is the great example to your point of the fact that, like, despite the fact that you have accounts like Kamala HQ, there is a ton of support for Trump on social media. Do I think it has impact? I mean, that is the $1 million question. I think that it indoctrinates hope, and as evidenced in Kamala's messaging and during Barack Obama's campaign years ago, you really can't undervalue hope, right? I think to
Right.
dismiss the
It's a
idea that
really
hope
good
is a
point.
powerful weapon is, a misguided sort of attempt. But is it going to make a significant change? Who's to say? But I have to believe it can. And so I think I lean on that hope to sort of be the driving force that it's posting things like memes or viral clips gets people talking. And I am choosing to believe that conversation is going to, whether it be an uncommitted voter or whether it be a first-time voter or whether it be a former Trumper who's on the fence about voting for him, I choose to believe that it makes a difference.
How many of those comments are bots? How many of those comments you think are bots? I always try to look and I look at the profile, and oftentimes they have 0 followers and they're following a few people. And it's really hard to determine. My team always is saying, especially if people say nasty things to me, oh, those are bots. Are they?
That's a great question. I too click on the profiles themselves. I think it's hard to really know. That's the thing.
Right.
But if you're simply going, let's say they are bots, right? Let's say 100% of them are bots. If you're someone like me and you're going in the comment section and all you're seeing is Trump, 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 and you don't know that they're bots, or even if you do know they're bots, it's still in that moment is like, wow, where's the Kamala support? I couldn't help for that be my takeaway from the Vogue comment section. So again, even if they are bots, it's effective in the fact that it leaves you thinking. I left the comment section of Vogue being like, wow, I'm not feeling great about this, So I think that, I still think it's powerful, even if it is bots. Sadly.
I want to, I think you and I are probably some of the few people who read comments on Instagram, but I'm fascinated by them, and I read them on other people's accounts because I want to hear what people are saying and what they are thinking. But I'm curious what you both think about Kamala's choices, Harris's choices. Someone said you shouldn't be Kamala versus Trump. You should be Harris versus Trump, that it's gendered to say Kamala. But what do you think of Vice President Harris's choices in terms of media interviews? She was getting a lot of blowback for not doing interviews, and now she is, but the interviews she's doing are not mainstream anchors. It's no Lester Holt, David Muir, Nora O'Donnell. Yes, she did 60 Minutes, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But that was really, and The View, I think, which has become sort of appointment viewing for anybody for appointment, I guess, an appointment appearance. What would that be? For anybody running for office. But the call her daddy, which my husband calls the show Call Me Daddy. I'm like, no, it's Call Her Daddy. And I don't even know why that show is called Call Her Daddy. Maybe you guys can explain. With Alex Cooper, who's got millions, especially young women, listening to her podcast. Howard Stern, that wasn't that surprising. And our team was talking about the fact that Hillary Clinton said she regretted not doing Howard Stern before 2016. And then she's done a lot of other podcasts, some local media, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. What do you think of that? And what do you think it says about the media today, Molly? I mean, if I were a network anchor, I'd be pulling my hair out and going a little crazy.
And in fact, they are. Well, look, it's my siloed media, right? And you want to meet the voters where they are, and they happen to be at Call Her Daddy. Right, 5 million up to 10 million women, a lot of independents, a lot of Republicans. Those are people who are not watching CBS News, right? Those are people who there's no world in which they are going to be turning on the TV. And I think that is really what she's doing, is she's trying to go to where the voters are. Now, do I think they should go? I think they should do more of that, right? I think they should go, if they want to win, like go on Theo Vaughn, right? Tell me if you think that's crazy, Evan, but go on Theo Vaughn. This is the guy who I just recently learned about, who has a very insane mullet. Correct?
What about him other than his mullet? Tell me more.
I think you got to go to Evan on this.
No, I'll be honest with you. I had never heard of him until this interview, so I think it did a great service. I think for people like me, I'm a pop culture chronicler, but he's not on my radar whatsoever, and now he is as a result of this. So it was a very mutually beneficial interview for both of them. And to your point, Katie, I think there are a lot of people who had never uttered the phrase "call her daddy" until this
Right.
appearance. So it ends up benefiting this new media ecosystem because there are lots of people that are going to say, I enjoyed this interview that Alex Cooper did with Kamala. I'm going to listen to more "Call Her Daddy." Whether or not that
Yeah.
audience will be satiated by what they hear, hard to say. But like, this is a back scratching on both sides.
And also the numbers are there. I mean, that's the other thing is like they're there. Like the people who listen to Joe Rogan do not listen to any other mainstream news. I mean, that may not be completely true, but I think a lot of them, he is their trusted messenger.
Well, why
And
wouldn't Tim, I had this conversation with Ezra Klein a couple of weeks ago, you guys, and I'm curious,
Humble brag.
why wouldn't Tim Walz go on Joe Rogan? Why wouldn't he go on all these sports radio podcasts and newscasts or whatever to appeal to more male voters? Because they are having a man problem, particularly a young man problem, particularly a young men of color problem.
today I texted Tim Walz and said, you should go on Joe Rogan. I literally did. I was like, you should go on Joe Rogan, go on Joe Rogan, go
And
on
did
Joe
he text you
Rogan.
back?
Yes. And I said, let Walz be Walz. And he said that maybe that's some of the problem. But yeah, I mean, I think they're doing that. He was just on with
Wait,
a
Molly,
football.
you have a texting relationship with Tim Walz?
Yes. I interviewed him and I was like, you guys, this guy's good. Now, of course, by the way, if she loses Pennsylvania, I will have been completely wrong. So I'm trying not, because if Shapiro would have meant winning Pennsylvania, who knows? But yeah, no, I interviewed him and thought this guy, was the head of the the Democratic Governors Association. So I'd interviewed him before, and he was famous for having passed a lot of progressive legislation, not so different than Pennsylvania, but free school lunches, free school breakfasts, a lot of stuff for kids that was very exciting to me. And so when I interviewed him, I thought he was a folksy guy who would be really good for this.
And why do you think, Evan, that Tim Walz isn't sort of everywhere? Do you think they're nervous to let Tim be Tim?
I mean, I would be to an extent in that. So for me, if you would have asked me this question before the VP debate, I would have been like, send him anywhere he can be. He's a
Right.
huge, important figure for us to, as a potential, not as a potential, as someone to go out there and disseminate the messages of Kamala Harris. But I think after that debate performance and the stumbling nature of it, I would be nervous in a situation like Joe Rogan is an interviewer who has an agenda, despite the fact that
Right.
he might not say as such. And there are going to be some gotcha questions in there. And I think if Walz proved anything in that VP debate, despite the fact that he got very lucky by having an 11th hour Hail Mary, I think that there are possibilities of him being walked into giving answers that are going to go against the ticket and potentially become viral talking points that work against Kamala. So while I do think he should go on Joe Rogan, I understand the weariness from the campaign.
What do you think, Molly? I mean, Tim Walz. Were you surprised that he kind of whiffed on a couple of questions during the debate, seemed very nervous, the weird Tiananmen Square thing, I'm a knucklehead. Did you expect him to be a little more sophisticated in those debates? And do you think that lack of slickness, if you will, may actually help him with voters?
Well, that's the $24 million question, right? Does that actually maybe help him? And again, it's the great unknown. I did see him today talking about football with Michael Strahan. Strahan, is that right? Strahan, yes. So I did see, so more of that is good, and they are having him go to football games, which is great because he is a football coach. He was nervous. I think that some of what happened there was bad debate prep, right? Because he had all this information and he only needed to just be authentic and not, I mean, let me just say one thing though, which was they decided not to fact check, which meant that it was on him to fact check. And JD Vance is very smooth and is a very good talker. and does a lot of media and is, can disseminate information very, very quickly. And I think that got his backup. Look, with the Tiananmen Square answer, he should have just said, yeah, I was wrong and let it go. Like there was some stuff just because
I
he's so new at
misspoke
this.
and I didn't mean to.
Right.
But that was a mistake. Like move on. I agree.
Right.
Less would have been more.
And but you have to remember, this is a guy who didn't know how to read a prompter. They had to teach him how to read the prompter. So, like, this is legit. He was a backbencher in Congress, and then he was a governor of a state that's not so much on anyone's radar. I mean, we love Minnesota, don't get me wrong, but, it's not California. So he came from really, whereas Vance had done a press tour, had written books, had been the darling of the,
Had done so many interviews, but it certainly had a very different persona during the debate. He was very pugnacious and difficult for people to interview, and would throw things back at them. It was very tricky interview situation. I thought Dana Bash did a good job, because I was like, good Lord, I would need some Depends or something if I were
Can I add, though, just like what I've been most surprised with in the past few weeks has been the lack of presence from a lot of the surrogates who really stood out at the DNC. So thinking about AOC, thinking about Pete Buttigieg, thinking about Jasmine Crockett, there were so many huge clippable moments that came out of the DNC that I think really excited not only the base, but people that had kind of soured on the Democratic Party. And I thought there was an opportunity to seize on that momentum that was formed at the debate. And I've just been really surprised. I mean, especially with Pete, like where has Pete been recently? And I know that's probably no choice of Pete's. But so, yes, I think it's important to have Walz out there, but I actually am sort of disappointed in the lack of other surrogates coming out and doing things. Like I'd love to see Pete Buttigieg on Joe Rogan.
That's interesting. That's interesting, because I just interviewed James Carville about his documentary and about some other things. And actually at a Google conference as well. And he was just hopping mad about the fact that they have not. And just actually this week, we saw Obama give a speech in Pittsburgh and talk to campaign headquarters. And, and he said Bill Clinton should be making himself available to local stations in every swing state in the country. Who's going to turn down an interview with Bill Clinton? Who's going to turn down an interview with Barack or Michelle Obama or anybody? And it does seem like they haven't, according to James, he was criticizing them for simply not being aggressive enough. What do you think of that assessment, Molly?
So I know Bill Clinton is doing a Southern States tour. So that is coming up. So that is definitely happening.
But I mean, what took so long, Molly?
Well, again, yes, I agree. And I actually was talking to yes. Yeah, agreed.
Oh, go ahead. Give us some tea, Molly.
Okay. The one thing I would say first, Mayor Pete. Mayor Pete did, in fact, do something very cool this week, which may have. So Elon Musk was talking about how he was having trouble getting into North Carolina and a lot of the lies about the federal government. And Mayor Pete called Elon and explained to him about what was happening with the airspace. And Elon was like, oh, that makes sense. So good on Mayor Pete look, Elon is really problematic, but he is the richest man in the world, and he does control.
He has so much influence. How many followers does he have on X, you guys?
Well, it's hard to know if that follower count is real.
But he controls 40 or to 60% of all the satellites. That's real. I mean, that's a big fucking deal. Like that guy, communication and I mean, he can. So I do think that was a really cool thing. But yes, they should. And Mayor Pete and Tim Walz. Tim was on Fox News last week on the Sunday show, but more of that. Put them on Fox. I mean, put them on everything you can get them on. Right.
Pete is absolutely. Pete is brilliant on Fox, by the way. I mean, I think he leaves the anchors kind of speechless when he makes points. And it's actually very interesting to watch the dynamics of that. I wanted to ask you about the lying by the Trump administration, because Molly, you wrote a piece about that. And, I think it was particularly evident, perhaps because it was in a concentrated period of time during Hurricane Helene and the aftermath, not to mention, obviously, what was going on in Springfield, Ohio with Haitian immigrants. Why don't people care? Why do his supporters not care, or do they not believe he is lying? It's hard to fathom that nothing, absolutely nothing, seems to be moving the needle. There doesn't seem to be any respect for the truth anymore.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that I'm struck by is that there was so much gentility at one point, right? You would have people like John McCain who would say, he's not a Muslim. I may
Right.
disagree
Stopping
with
a
him.
woman in the crowd who was criticizing. That is such an incredible piece of video. Evan, I don't know
Right.
if you've seen that, but you should watch John McCain chastising gently a woman in a campaign crowd for yelling that Barack Obama is a Muslim. He said he's a fine American. You just would never see that today.
Right. And it's not that you would never see it from Trump and his people, right? It's the opposite of MAGA. If MAGA loses, I could see a world where these people start saying, I never supported it. I was a McCain person. I mean, success has 1,000 fathers, failure none, right? So I do think that if that happens, which again is not a fait accompli, I think that the part of it is that they trust Trump more than they trust other things, including their friends and family. And so Trump can say something is true. And even if it's not true, they will still believe it to be true, or they will believe it to be close enough that they will follow it. I mean, the answer is to have more content moderation, right? If they didn't see on Facebook things that weren't true, if they didn't see on X or on TikTok, if they saw stuff where it said, I mean, one of the good things about X is they have community notes. So you can see when Marjorie Taylor Greene says they can control the weather, it has 15 community notes on it.
I don't think it's the media's fault, but
no, certainly not.
But this bifurcation of the media, this absolute kind of destruction of traditional media with any gatekeepers, any kind of editing, any kind of fact checking, has really just, as my father-in-law says, lifted the lid off the sewer and completely allowed anyone to say whatever they want. And then I think it becomes very tribal and people just listen to what they want to listen to that confirms their, point of view. So I don't know how to fix this. Is there any way? You say content moderation. I mean, is the genie out of the bottle in your view, Evan?
Yes, but I also feel like, so it's a different ball game that has to be played now, but we have to be willing to still play the game. So I think, though I don't have the solution necessarily, I think that we have to stay activated and stay motivated and find ways to say, yes, if we don't have content moderation, for instance, if we have, whatever Elon Musk is running sites like Twitter, how can we find and take the best from it? Because as I said earlier, I'm still extracting information from Twitter. I still find it very valuable. There are still reputable news organizations on Twitter putting out reputable news. So it's not as though these places are entirely sewers, there's things to be found from them. What we need is people that are able to find the best aspects of these and extract them and disseminate them to an audience willing to hear them. But again, too, you don't want to get into the situation where you're speaking into echo chambers, right? The most important voters right now are the undecideds, are the ones willing to have their opinion, who have malleable opinions. And so I think part of the worry that I have, even with a platform like mine, is that I'm speaking to the people who already have their minds made up. So I think there needs to be more willingness from people to dignify those undecided voters. What I see a lot of right now from people that I follow is shitting on undecided voters and being like, these idiots, how could you not be convinced with everything that we've seen that Kamala is the right candidate? And while I understand that mentality, that is not a helpful mentality in indoctrinating these undecided voters to make a decision. And so I think we need to be more respectful on social media of those who are still weighing their options and say, you know what? I hear you. I hear that you don't have your mind made up. And here's why I think that I can be effective in helping convince you.
Molly, can you describe the undecided voter today? Because I hate to be one of those people who doesn't understand how anybody could be undecided at this juncture, but it does seem remarkable that there are actually people out there who don't see this as a clear decision or have not been paying attention enough to at least have an inkling of who they're going to vote for.
So it's a lot of people who don't follow politics, right? And if you have, if you're a working mom with kids and a very crazy full-time job, and you maybe are a single mom and you just don't have time for television, and you're, maybe you're a nurse, or join me in this fantasy of the nurse single mom with all these kids and no time to read the newspaper. I mean, I think there are people who don't pay attention to politics or don't remember Trumpism, or people who are very affected by inflation and things being more expensive. And for them, they just see that even though everyone's telling them the economy is good, they can't afford the number of groceries they could a year ago. Now, it wouldn't be a year ago because inflation has actually gone down. But that would be, in my head, those are the voters who Trump is saying, and remember, Trump is promising a lot of stuff. I mean, he basically just promises everything all the time. So, he went to Nevada and he promised no more taxes on tips. Now, of course, I mean, more complicated, and then he went to Michigan yesterday in Detroit. He said terrible things about Detroit to Detroit. And then he also promised that he would make car loans tax deductible. Now, there is no world in which a depreciating asset like a car should have a tax deductible loan, and you would have to grow the IRS to do this. And the Republican Party is very mad at the IRS and does not want to grow the IRS. So, but, if you're a voter who's taking in very little of this, and you're very, you're pinched and you're mad and you're worried, I could see how you might. And remember, historically, people have thought Republicans were better in the economy. I don't know. That's my fantasy of what the borderline voter is.
By the way, Kamala, I was just going to say, by the way, Kamala also supports no tax on tips.
Right, exactly.
She followed Trump's lead on that.
Yeah, exactly.
Go ahead, Evan.
No, but I was going to say, if you're someone that hears these Trump policies, which really, as pointed out, are kind of just fantasies, but if you hear him, making these promises and you believe them to be true, if you're on the other side of that and try to go to this Trump voter and say, everything he's promising is a lie, that's not an effective tool, I feel, in changing their mind. They're going to say, this is the man whose beliefs I idealize, and I think he is the best for me. So there's a smugness that I think some of the supporters of Kamala can have in sort of trying to educate these Trump voters by enlightening them. And so again, I think it's really important in our tone, in how we speak to those undecideds or even those Trump voters, in helping them realize that what they've been promised is indeed a lie. But I think it's all about how we go about bursting that lie, because again, I think sometimes that can just cause those supporters to dig in their heels and say, well, I'm going to double down on my belief system because I don't want this smug tone telling me that I'm wrong.
We have to wrap things up because I know Molly has to get to MSNBC. Sorry. But wait, Molly, can Evan ask one last question about celebrity?
Yes, please. I love Evan
about celebrity
so much. And
about celebrity endorsements, because I think that would be a good one for you, Evan.
Yes, please.
Yeah, so I'm just curious, what are your thoughts on sort of the viability of celebrity endorsements? Obviously, we have the big ticket ones, the Taylor Swifts, the Bruce Springsteen. But, as we saw, there's been a ton of interest around Chappell Rowan, for instance, and whether or not she was coming out and supporting Kamala. She eventually was, I would say, forced to come out in support of Kamala. What do you think about this sort of pressure that's grown, these expectation that especially young stars are expected to not only have their vote locked, but also let their fans know who they're voting for and actually, quote unquote, endorse a candidate?
Julia Roberts was in Georgia yesterday campaigning for Harris. I think it's, look, certainly Taylor Swift moves the needle, I think, because you can't look at those numbers and not think she moves the needle. And she these are women who this is a election all about reproductive rights, so that makes sense. These are women of reproductive age, right? So I mean, that's one of the things that with Taylor, and we saw this with with Alexis from Call Her Daddy. She also said she was struggling. She didn't want to get involved in the election, but she has all of these women who listen to her, who are, they talked about sexual violence during the interview with Vice President Harris. It was very focused on like the problems of young women. So I do think that that is important. And look, a lot, that we talk about celebrity culture so much, and a lot of these celebrities are very, these young women are very connected to women's issues. And so I do think in that way, it certainly makes a lot of sense. And actors don't want to get into politics, but another Trump administration will mean things. I mean, I was thinking about, Project 2025. I actually did a YouTube series on it. There's a lot of stuff about like ending pornography, right? Like there won't be porn, right? This is fine, maybe fine, but that's like Americans don't like that. And it will mean a whole industry will go away. And will that mean that like movies won't have like nudity, and will movies have to be checked by people? I mean, it's a real Christian kind of fundamentalist view in 2020, Project 2025. So like it will affect performers. Like if a performer wants to perform in a bra like Madonna, they may not be able to do that anymore. I mean, this really is, if they're able to enact Project 2025, I mean, it's going to mean a new.
Its tentacles are long and affect so many aspects of American life. I just wanted to throw in this idea that sometimes I think celebrity endorsements can backfire,
Right.
because I think with social media, celebrity culture, I think sometimes people feel like, ugh, enough already. I mean, there are beloved celebrities like
Right.
Jennifer Garner and, but even Bruce Springsteen, of course, who I worship, the negative things that were posted on X after he endorsed Harris, I was like, wow, there are a lot of people who don't want to hear from Bruce Springsteen. Celebrities do represent the elite, if you will. And if they might be considered too much part and parcel with sort of the 1%, that there's so much anger and angst among people who are struggling to pay the bills, and with with the grocery store prices, et cetera, even if they are going down, they're still high. If that might turn people off more than excite them.
It might, but I feel like, celebrity is not a monolith. And so I think that there's a difference between a Jennifer Garner and a Chappell Rowan. And to your point about this idea that people have that celebrities are the 1%, again, some celebrities like Julia Roberts, sure, yes. But Chappell Rowan, who's been famous for 10 minutes, I don't think she's a billionaire. I don't think she's on the verge of, I shouldn't say on the verge. She's perhaps on her ascent up to the 1%, but I think part of the appeal of someone like Chappell Rowan is the idea of her being the every person. And so I actually think, sure, in some instances it can work against, but I also think equally so, there's a faction of celebrity who it can work for. So again, not a monolith. Some I find more effective than others. And also, as someone who, chronicles pop culture, I like seeing when my fave comes out and gets a little political, understanding that it's going to be off-putting for some. I think it's you roll the dice. Some people are going to love you for it. Some people are going to hate it. They're going to love you if you do speak out. They're going to love you if you don't. It's sort of you have to sort of have some sort of integrity and say, this is what's important to me, and whether that be speaking up or staying silent.
Bye, Molly. I know you got to go. It's been so fun talking to you. Evan, you want to say bid adieu to Molly?
Yes, Molly, thank you so much. This was a pleasure.
I'm so sorry. I have to
go.
Goodbye. Thank you both
Molly,
for having me so much. Thanks, you guys.
Evan, it was so fun doing this with you. Did you have a good time?
I had such a good time. I always have a good time with you, Katie. I mean,
what
come
else? On. I mean, I feel like there's so much to discuss. I feel like you and I
throw
need
the
to
topic
have...
my way, and I will hit
well,
the ball.
You and I need to have a cocktail or something and really get into it, because
I agree.
It is such a fascinating time. And how are you feeling about the election? I think people are getting increasingly nervous as it gets closer and closer, because the polls, believe them or not, show the race is so tight. How do you think it's going to go?
Yeah, well, I mean, I would go back to hope as sort of being my pervasive emotion at the moment because I choose that. I'm anxious. Yes, I was anxious in 2020. I was anxious in 2016 and 2012, etc. I think it's very normal to be anxious in times like these, as well as the fact that there are myriad other anxieties that one can have at the moment with everything going on in the world, from global disasters to wars rampant. So yes, anxiety is certainly an emotion that I feel, but I feel a lot of excitement and I feel hopeful about the prospect of change that Kamala brings about. I'm still energized from the DNC debate by seeing all of these young Democrats emerging that I think could potentially be viable nominees for us in the future. Again, I will say, Pete, AOC, Jasmine Crockett, et cetera. I think that there is an energy that no matter the outcome of this election, I am energized by the possibility of the Democratic Party moving forward. And I did not feel that prior to the DNC. And so I'm not quite over the power that I think the first 3 nights in particular of the DNC had on changing the conversation for the Democrats. I think that was a really powerful moment.
I read a piece this morning, I think it was in Puck, that Washington is just not ready for the possibility of a Trump presidency. Are you prepared for that?
I'm not sure how one can be prepared for it, but I think the thing, if we're being really honest here, we've done it before. I know this is not something that people want to hear, but we experienced 4 years of a Trump presidency. So it's not unprecedented territory we would be going into in a sense. I realize times are different and there are policies that he's put forward that were not a part of the messaging from 4 years ago. But to say that these are uncharted waters is simply untrue. So though I am not prepared for it, we do have a precedent to look at. And obviously I can only speak for myself. It was a horrible time to be in. So I am preparing myself for it, but also not saying that I have no idea what it will be like. I am hopeful if Trump becomes the president that the other two levers of power will go the Democratic way and will essentially block, the policies that he would want to put forward. So for me, if we're not going to get the presidency, it's equally important to have our eye on retaining that Senate majority and keeping the House. So that to me is sort of where if I move my hope from the presidency, I move it over to the other two levers of power.
I'll have what you're having.
Thank you.
Evan,
yeah,
thank
I'm
you.
kidding. So you're not feeling as hopeful as I am. I get the sense.
Yeah. I'm trying to keep hope alive, but I'm having trouble. But Evan, Ross Katz, thank you so much. This was so much fun, and I'll see you soon, I hope.
I hope so.